Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Falck. I'm a professional nerd of one variety or another. I run games of Dungeons and Dragons, and in my off time, I come here and I talk about comic books with my good friend Konrad.
Perfect. And my name's Konrad. I'm your regular host on Wednesday Night Reviews. And of course, I'm sitting down today with my good buddy Tyler to talk about comics, as always, on After Hours number 2. So, Tyler, what did you read?
Sure. So this is an old favorite of mine. Ever since I discovered it, oh, like half a decade back or so, I guess. I'm not even sure when it was originally published. Um, but it's a book by the name of Phonogram, specifically the second volume, The Singles Club. I think I read The Singles Club before I read the first volume. And I mean, like I've read all three volumes of Phonogram now, and I mean I love them all. But the first volume, Rue Britannia, is dense, and it's a little bit harder to get through. Like I like it, but I definitely don't think it's the most approachable entry point into the series. By contrast, I think that the Singles Club is a really, really brilliant piece of comic book writing. I think that the way it weaves together the stories, to give a brief synopsis, the Singles Club tells, and the title's a pun,
Okay.
tells the story of seven people, our seven main characters, are during one night, over the course of one night, at a uh, at a club night. It's going to be a DJ kind of club night. It's an indie night at a club in England,
hmm
and it is a singles club, both in that all the characters who go there are single in one form or another, and it's a singles club in that the DJs are playing hot singles. Um, like Phonogram is all about music, and the central conceit of the setting that you need to understand is that in this setting, it's our modern world, but music is very literally magic. And there are people called phonomancers who are able to draw magic out of pop music. But this is
Cool.
all just a really fancy metaphor for the way magic makes people feel, or the way music makes people feel, and the sort of magic that that power holds over us. Um, so really, like it's a big hoity-toity metaphor that's just for like music is magic basically. uh
I mean, I'm inclined to agree.
yeah, I mean, like, absolutely. I think anybody who's really gotten lost in a song, favorite song before, understands the power that music has over your mood and your outlook. The way a happy song can turn a bad day around, and the way a sad song can really let you dive into those feelings. Like, yeah. But what I love about the Singles Club is that each issue tells the story of the same evening from a different character's perspective. That it's
Okay.
all one night at the Singles Club, and that each issue just goes one by one through the kind of main cast and tells this story.
And do they ever interact, or is it like totally 7 or 6 or 7
Yeah,
separate
no, they
stories?
absolutely interact, and like I think that's the great part about it, is that it shows you how these different interactions look from different people's perspective.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so yeah, yeah,
Right on. And uh, you happen to have a copy of it on hand, correct? Like a physical copy?
yeah. I do. Yep. This is my copy. Phonogram, The Singles Club.
That's really cool. I'm assuming it's not all just 7 people sitting there drinking together and all that kind of stuff. Um,
No, definitely not. So the first issue tells the story of Penny B, who is a 19-year-old girl, young woman. She's going out with her best friend Laura to the eponymous club. Let me see, what exactly is the name of this club night, because I think it's actually just called the Singles Club. Or no, it's Never on a Sunday. That's what it's called.
Never on Sunday.
Never on
Okay.
a Sunday, because they do every fourth Saturday. They do this club, and so the club night is called Never on a Sunday. Uh, but yeah, it's phenomenal. So have you read it, or
I haven't had the chance to go through it. You've sent me over some playlists and things like that, and I pulled them up. And it
sure?
was a bunch of like the obscure indie stuff that you've seen. I've
Yeah,
Wikipedia'd it a little bit just to understand it. And I thought it
sure.
was really interesting, like exactly how much music integrated with it. And like you said, in the book itself, it gives you like a playlist basically, right?
Yeah, so like every issue is actually named either after a song itself or after the main lyrics of a song. And so like the playlist is literally the songs that the different issues touch on, and usually these songs are songs that are important to one character or another in the issue. Um,
Wow.
so like literally in the first issue starts us with Penny B, who is uh, she's a young woman, and as a phonomancer, she draws her magic particularly from dancing. She dances to music, and it's a magical experience. And the comic shows this in a really good way. Like what we see is this very just sort of um, psychedelic kind of worldview as she dances.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And so as she dance, like we start the issue actually, and she's talking to the reader because she has summoned the reader as an audience, because she particularly draws her power from being watched while dancing. So we're her audience for the night. We're going to follow her along with for the
Mhm.
night, and she's very excited to take us to this club night that she really likes. And she introduces us to a few of the different people that she knows. Her friend, Laura Heaven. Her name is that's her sort of phonomancer name. Her name is Laura Evans, but yeah. And as she introduces Laura, she tells us, Laura is an expert in something. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but she's an expert in it. Or if she isn't, she'll be one soon. And yeah, so we get these kind of brief glimpses at all the other characters, but principally, what we come to find out is that Penny is coming to this club night because she's excited to meet a young man who she has been crushing on hard, who she says is totes cutes,
Oh
or many, many
God.
cutes. And she's excited because this is the first time he's going to have been back out in a while. Because after dating a woman for several months last year and their bad breakup, he hasn't come out in a while. But he is many, many cutes, and he's an excellent dancer, as far as she says. So she's missed dancing with him, and she's excited to see him here, to get the DJ to play her favorite song, and to dance with this boy named Mark. Uh, and this is where I think like the comic really excels, because this issue, so Penny B's story really sets the stage for the whole series, because basically her story intersects, at least briefly, with all of the other major players at the club that night, and her interactions with them, we see her very limited perspective on those
Mhm.
interactions, but then later we see those interactions from the perspective of all the other characters involved as we go through their stories. And that gives us, I think, the first best look at sort of the central thesis that, this is a very subjective experience. And that while Penny reacts very strongly to her experience with the different people at the club, and she has often like very negative reactions to some things they do or say, her perspective on what they're doing is very limited. So after things kind of go badly over and over again for Penny, she asks the DJ to play her. She asks the DJ to play her favorite song. She asks them to play "Pull Shapes" by the Pipettes, which is a poppy, catchy dancing tune that I'm not even going to try to sing because I can't. But she asks the DJ to play the Pipettes, and he reacts furiously because Never on a Sunday has 3 rules. 1, you must dance. Not a problem for Penny.
Yeah.
2, no lead male vocals. All the songs they play have lead female vocals. It's just a rule they have, and as they explain it several times, it's because it avoids a lot of the stuff that these people don't like, and it means that you get people who are just okay with all kinds of music, and they're there to dance and have a good time. But the third rule, which is hidden on the flyers in glyphs, basically, is that no magic is allowed in the club. Because the DJs who run it are also phonomancers and don't allow magic in their club night. And so when Penny B approaches the DJ, she tries to use magic to convince him to play Pull Shapes. He reacts, he's furious. He's like, you come into my club and you try to use magic on me to make me play the Pipettes. And she, retreats a bit. And he's like, I bet you don't even know anything about the Pipettes. Like, what was their first single? And she's like, I like a man in uniform. He's like, no, it was this other song. And you know what? He's like, they mean absolutely nothing like you. So you know what? You can go back out to the dance floor, and in a little bit, you can be happy to bounce up and down to the fucking gossip.
Wow.
And he just and she runs off and she cries, but she collects herself, and after she collects herself, she goes, that was mean, wasn't it? She's talking to us again because we are her audience for this whole issue, and she talks to us frequently. And she sees Mark standing by the wall, kind of looking out at the dance floor. He's leaned up against the wall. He's looking out at the dance floor. And she hears a song come on, and she says, it is, what's the name of the song? It's important. Something, and listen to Death from Above. What is the name of that song? I sent you. Oh, let's make love and listen to Death from Above. That's what it is.
Okay.
Let's make love and listen to Death from Above. And it's actually a pretty bouncy pop song. But so she hears it come on and she says, this is as good as anything. And she walks up to Mark, and from behind she says, Mark, do you want to dance? And we only see Mark from behind as he says, yes. And she smiles. And he says, but not with you.
Oh.
And she's crushed. She's crushed. She runs away. And the rest of the comic, she's like looking for her friend and trying to figure out what's going on. And this other guy stops her and is trying to tell her stuff and telling her she's this just vampire feeding on other people's attention. And then finally she hears Pull Shapes come on. The DJ's playing Pull Shapes. And she says, he yelled at me, but they're playing it anyway. It's my song. And she turns to us and she says, sorry, I've been an idiot. I need to go dance. And I don't think I need you anymore. I'm going to go dance for me. And she goes off to the dance floor, and the issue ends in blinding light as the magic of Penny's dance just lens flares the camera, basically. And so that's our introduction to the Singles Club.
Mm-hmm.
And without going into every single issue of it, because like that,
Yeah.
summarize the comic before, it's like, but what we get in the very second issue, because the second issue is Mark's issue, where we follow him through the club. We follow him as he's pulled out by his friend Lloyd, he drags him out to the Singles Club because Lloyd and Laura have been collaborating behind the scenes to get Mark and Penny out to the Singles Club, because
okay.
Lloyd wants to talk to Penny about something, and Laura wants to get Mark out for Penny, but also for herself. And Mark is going along because he hasn't been out, in ages. And Lloyd says, are you thinking about her? And he says no. And then Lloyd realizes he was thinking about her, and we get one of the best insults of the comic, which is, you are the Sherlock Holmes of indie rock.
Okay.
You're the Sherlock Holmes of indie. But anyway, so he drags Mark out, and from there we see that throughout the entire club night, Mark is actually interacting with the ghost of his ex. He sees her everywhere.
Oh shit.
He sees her on the dance floor. He sees her talking to him. And he is sort of lost in this mental conversation with her, reliving the beginning of their relationship. Because he feels like she's cursed him, that his heart is just broken, that she's done something to him. And she, just berates him for this and forces him to relive the beginning of their relationship. And slowly, painfully, forces him to confront the fact that, yes, their relationship ended badly, but there were good parts too. And she's not the one who's done this to him. He's the one who's punishing himself. He's the one who's forcing himself to dwell on all the bad parts of his relationship. And at the very end of the issue, after going through all of this, after reliving all of this, he's broken down, leaning against the wall, clutching his chest, as he says, then why are you making, why does this hurt? Why does it hurt like this? And she tells him again, you're bullshitting yourself, you're the one doing this to yourself. And so as he leans there against the wall, clutching his chest, a tear rolls down his face, and he watches himself dancing with his girlfriend at the beginning of their relationship out on the dance floor. And it's here that Penny comes up behind him and asks him to dance. She says, do you want to dance? And he says yes. But this time we get the conversation from his side. We see his face. And as he says, yes, but not with you, a tear rolls down his cheek as he looks out on the dance floor and watches himself happy dancing with his ex.
Whoa.
And we understand that when he shot down Penny, it wasn't malicious. It wasn't the hurtful thing that we saw it from in her perspective, or saw it as from her perspective, that it was a very, he was all wrapped up in himself, and he was breaking down himself. And so all the issues of Phonogram kind of work like this. Each one of them is a look at the events of this night from somebody else's perspective. And as we see more and more perspectives on the night, we learn basically that there are facets to these people and their interactions that we didn't see before. And that's what I think is so brilliant about it.
Definitely.
It has that layered kind of interwoven story.
Yeah, I definitely think that it would be a comic where you'd have to read it 2 or 3 times, and maybe from different starting points. That sort of touches on some of the stuff that me being a fan of Grant Morrison, and I've read his book Super Gods, where he talks about comics, the creation process, and sort of time. And I feel like to have that book as a graphic novel will set up the story in one way, inherently because the way it's bound. To have these 6 issues where you can
Yeah.
start at 4, then read 1, then read 7 or whatever,
Right.
you could get a really cool look at it. And I think from the medium of comics, one, that's super cool.
Yeah.
I also think the concept of that is fabulous. Like, to have, it's obviously slice of life, but by having them sort of puzzle piece together like that, um,
Yeah.
yeah, it really goes a long way to talk about like exactly how we don't know every bit of everyone's lives. We cannot always see what everyone's thinking or going through or what they even mean. Um, I think it's super cool. That's a great comic.
Right. Right. Yeah. And because like I think it touches on, I mean, this very, each issue kind of touches on, I think, an experience that I can relate to. Penny's self-consciousness and need for external validation finally giving way as she realizes that she's the only one who needs to, she needs to be dancing for herself, not for
Mm-hmm.
other people. Like that's, that story. Then, I mean, Mark, I think anybody who's gone through a bad breakup and has dwelt on, memories of their ex and replayed the relationship in their head over and over again, anybody can sympathize with Mark and understand the way, hearing that song, that familiar song, can send you right back
Yeah.
to that right back to that moment.
Wow.
That it, like, literally this music conjures up the image of his ex for him. That's the magical realism of Phonogram. But then, like, we get other characters, like, without spoiling the individual issues. One of my favorite characters from it, and the main character of the third volume, is a woman named Emily Astor. And to sum up Emily Astor in a sentence is to say that Emily Astor was a typical indie music lover who hated herself so much that she sold half of her personality to the king behind the screen in order to craft a better her.
Wow.
And so she has made herself into this sort of idealized version of what she wants to be. But the person she sees in the mirror is the part of herself that she gave up.
Oh, that's.
And like it's great because like that is like that is so on the nose for anybody who's ever tried to change themselves to make themselves like happier, to like be kind, or to
Mm-hmm.
try to make themselves into the kind of person they think they want to be, who still struggles with looking back and seeing those memories of who they were, because that
Wow.
haunts you, that follows you. uh, and like, so that's Emily's story. uh,
Damn.
or uh, Laura, who is living in the shadow of her friend Penny because Penny's effortless, and Laura just isn't. And Laura's whole shtick is that she quotes song lyrics nearly constantly, uh, which belies the fact that she is trying to copy other people. She is
Mm-hmm.
trying to, find meaning in words that other people use, to craft herself out of. Um,
It's really
and
interesting.
her, yeah, like, she loves the long blondes. That's her favorite group in the comic. uh and she has lots to say about why she likes the long blondes so much. And then we get Lloyd, who is, so he's trying so hard to get people to take him seriously. He's 19 and he wears a full suit out to an indie club night and refuses to drink because he doesn't want to be ruled by his vices. And actually, like, uh I'm going to butcher his name, but do you know how to say the author's name? Kieran
I think
Gillen,
it's Gillen, but it could be
Kieran
Gillen.
Gillen. Yeah. But he actually talks about it at the back of the book, in the sort of author's notes sections, that Lloyd is basically based on himself from a period of his life where he says I was about as close to straight edge as you could get, and I really, really probably needed to get laid really badly. um, and I mean, you can see it because like Lloyd is trying so desperately to get people to take him seriously, and he's just all wrapped up in this. He's got this musical project that he's
Ooh.
obsessing over, that he's trying to convince everybody is this great, brilliant idea, and he like everyone kind of listens to him and they're like, "Huh, that's kind of cool," you know. But
Yeah.
nobody is as impressed with it as he wants them to be. Um,
That's fair.
and like he's just so like he's so frustrated, and it's great. It's palpable. Like you can see it on the page.
Yeah.
Um,
Like I think
and yeah,
what I really like about the sound of this comic is, no pun intended, um each of those characters, at least half of them so far, I can identify with how they felt at some point in time. And I think
yeah,
for Kieran Gillen, the writer who's done so much, um, to have layered that in such a way that not only are you getting their individual stories, but as you read on, you're getting how it interconnects and what they actually mean. Um, I think there's a lot of power to that, and like that's true
yeah,
form comics. Like that's great.
yeah. No, I think the fact that I can look at this comic and think to myself, I don't just sympathize with these characters. I have been these characters at different points in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can remember agonizing over an ex the way Mark did. You know, I can remember that feeling of just being locked up in my room, listening to the same songs over and over again as I, replay that relationship in my head. I can remember being Lloyd and trying so desperately to sound smart and mature so that people will take me seriously that I just come off as, a pompous ass, like who's trying really hard. Uh, I can remember uh, I can remember being uh, I can remember being Emily and trying really hard to sort of craft this version of myself that I think will be the most likable or impressive. And like, although I remember that in high school, like I remember
Yeah.
giving up hobbies and things like that so that I would, like cutting those things out of my life because I was like, these aren't cool and people will laugh at me or mock me for them, and like the fact that all of these characters are so relatable is one of the things that's brought me back to this comic so many times.
Hell yeah. Like it's it's in the a fantastical way. Um it is also very much like plain. Like it's like you said, each character almost, I bet you literally everyone on the planet can relate to. And I think there's such a
Yeah,
power to that. Um
yeah,
yeah. It's awesome. And,
and,
okay,
I,
throw
and
up
then
the
I think, yeah,
throw up the cover again. And it's
yeah, absolutely,
Phonogram.
yep, the
That's
Singles Club.
awesome. Who did the art on it?
So this is Jamie McKelvey, who also he's worked with Kieran, I believe it's a he, has worked with Kieran on a number of their projects together. So yeah, like it's a very distinctive art style. Like it's I don't know how to describe it well, but like I recognize it instantly anytime I seen it.
Okay.
He's done a number of high projects lately. Like been on uh like let's see. So Kieran's written like Young Avengers and Iron Man as far as like big name comics.
Yep.
And Jamie's been on Suburban Glamour, which was his own project. Young Avengers, X-Men season 1, like they've both been pretty prolific lately.
Yeah.
So,
They've been around the block a few times.
yeah.
That's
But
awesome.
I will say like I haven't touched on this issue yet because it's the last issue and in some ways it's not in some ways it is the least connected of the issues to the rest of it. There's a side character. He's uh, David Cole, the main character from the first comic. David Cole has a friend, this sort of perennial hanger-on who shows up anytime David needs help and just kind of drives him around or gets into trouble with him. And he is notable because in this comic about phonomancers, he is the only normal guy. He
Oh.
doesn't have magical powers. He's not, and his name, as it were, is Kid with Knife. Uh, that's what everyone calls him. He's Kid with Knife,
Okay.
KWK, and he's just sort of like this. He's this. I'm not even sure what English stereotype to call it. He's got like buzzed hair and wears a hoodie everywhere and like gets stoned and drinks a lot and like drives and gets violent basically. But the final issue is Kid with Knife's perspective on the night, and basically he's done nothing throughout the whole thing except basically be there, party, and drink. He shows up late to the singles club, and that's what he's doing.
Oh, all right.
And so the final issue starts off with Kid with Knife talking to the reader, saying basically that he sat down with his friend David. And he said, like, show me some tricks. Like you talk about this phonomancy whatever stuff. Show me something. Like just a little something. And he says David told him, okay, pick a song. Doesn't matter what, just that it matters to you. Put it on, crank it up, listen to it on repeat, and let it fill you up until it's filling every single cell of you. And when you feel that, just inside, hold on to it and ride it as long as you can. And Kid with Knife turns to the camera and he says, I said, shit, that's magic? Everyone does that. And then what follows is the splash page, which says, Wolf Like Me, a song by TV on the Radio. And then what follows is the entire rest of the issue has zero dialogue as Kid with Knife goes on an like absolute bender around town on his way to the club night. Like his speech bubbles are replaced with pictographs.
Oh, cool. All right.
So when he shouts at some punks who are harassing a couple of like emo kids, and he shouts at them, and his invectives are replaced with pictographs.
Oh my god.
Which, like, if you take a second, like, you can absolutely read what he's saying. Like you know exactly what he's saying, and we see his eyes glowing, throughout the whole night as he's writing this song, which Wolf Like Me is obliquely about being a werewolf, but it's this animal inside. And yeah, the whole issue is him just like running around, giving these punks the slip. They chase him to the club, and he's doing all this stuff. He stops and he gets a kebab and he sneaks it into the club and meets up with his friends to party. And then we find out at the very end, to tie the whole thing back together, that as Penny kind of blinds out the dance floor, we've heard vague references to somebody else dancing with Penny. We find out that it was Kid with Knife who goes and dances with Penny, and he goes home with her, and they have
cool.
sex. And that's the ending.
That's awesome.
Like it is, like, it's amazing because after this whole graphic novel of these really weird experimental kind of issues, we get an issue with basically 2 pages of dialogue, the first and last page, and everything else is just Kid with Knife's crazy story for the evening. But yeah, like it's amazing. I think it's phenomenal, and like I like both Volume 1 and Volume 3. If I had to place them in order, I'd say it's probably 2, 3, 1. Like 3 is really good and it's really close, but it's more conventional in that it follows a chronological narrative. But 2, just like with the brilliant way it interweaves this evening, is I think just impressive. Like, it's the kind of thing that I've long believed that, like, English professors need to actually start taking a look at comics. Writing professors need to start taking a look at comics as a source of critical material to evaluate in classes and talk to students about, because there's so much that can be said, and, like, especially in some of my favorites, some of the things that I think are the great stories to come out of graphic novels after the last few decades,
Mm-hmm.
things like Sandman, things like this. I think there's a lot of really good stuff to look at that is just kind of not given any credit
Oh, it's a
from.
comic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, that's so easily said dismissively, but like, a story like this that's so tightly interwoven, I mean, I'll take this over Crime and Punishment any day.
Agreed, actually. And no, I think you're absolutely right. Like, when it comes to, like, the academic appreciation of comics, one, there needs to be more of it, just because of how proliferated it is. And I don't mean, like, in the respect of, like, oh, we can see in 1930, Detective Comics came out and it was very valuable now as it sold for $4 million, which is cool. And if anyone wants to hand me a copy of Detective Comics 27, like, yeah, go for it. But I think you're right. Like, the narratives that comic creators come up with, both visually written and then the myriad of ways in which they can interconnect those two formats, have really allowed for comics to be an elevated medium. Like, I always enjoy when someone ever asks, "What's your favorite type of art?" I say comics. And I've thought about this a lot. So my partner, as you know, as YouTube land now, my partner, she has her master's degree in art, media, and design. God, what is her IAMD? I think it's interdisciplinary art, media, and design. So it's like she did, like, 3D printing, sculpting, metalwork, all of it, and then she has her BA in fine arts. And throughout her education, she took lessons breaking down comics. So it's starting to get there. It's starting to be taught more. I wish I could have taken some of those classes. It'd be pretty cool. But when I've broken down and spoken with her about it, and then, we've tried to break down the subject of how to make it, and perhaps this is me trying to sound more professional than I am or whatever, but when I've tried to come up with a title for myself other than, like, host, right? Because I am a host of this show and of my regular show. I've gone, okay, is it journalism? Is it technically journalism? I'm interviewing people. Like, we have our podcast here, or our show, whatever you want to call this. But I've also interviewed creators and comic book writers and artists. So it's technically journalism. I'm like, okay, so it's entertainment journalism, perhaps. But a title that I like the sound of, I don't use it frequently, but I like the sound of it, is... now it's escaping my mind, of course.
Of course.
Oh, sequential art critic. So in art, there's, you can have a single painting. You can then have a triptych, so 3 pieces of art that line up to tell some sort of story or show feeling. And then there's sequential art, which is the best way I can think to describe a comic, because you have a variety of panels lining up to tell you a story. Or in Phonogram's case, 7 issues of those to tell you a complex story. So, in my experience of comics, I have found that the way that stories get told can be so much more interesting, right? Like, if you pick up art, you can look at it, especially if it's like a painting or drawing, and you can appreciate that. And there's amazing art out there. But then there's comic book artists like Alex Ross, who most, pops in my mind, who are taking comic art and putting the level of love and detail and skill into it like a classical painter might. Where, actually, hold on. Let's not break anything, Konrad. So, Alex Ross, for anyone out there who doesn't know, is known for painting gorgeous comics like this one.
Oof.
Oof. Yeah, exactly. And the book itself, every page is
That's
this. Like, it's that level of painting. And this is where I think, like, this
is
version. Mhm.
is he the oh god, the name is escaping. Kingdom Come. Did he do
Yep.
Kingdom Come?
He did Kingdom Come.
I
He
was going to
did
say, like,
Justice.
I know that art style. I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
that's like an artist who's taking comics and through skill elevating the visual medium to what I would call high art. Then you have writers like Kieran
right.
Gillen who are taking a written narrative and turning them from like a standard, like a normal book, like a written fiction book, and using the visual component, being able to tear it apart and reformat it. And that's why I think,
Well,
yeah, like,
so
mhm.
I think one of the things, because we were talking earlier, like how do you convince academic society that this is
Mhm.
something that's worth looking at? And I mean, I'm not sure. I think they'll have to kind of get there on their own at a certain point. Um, but like I think the study of comics is probably a lot closer to the study of like film,
Yes.
like studying like movies than it is to some studying like you know novels.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I think that like especially one thing that you see, and I mean we're seeing this more in popular novels, stories like everything from the Song of Ice and Fire series,
Game of
but
Thrones for those who
also,
weren't know.
yeah, yeah, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, but also things like, I mean, hell, uh, Twilight did this, where it's like different chapters are told from different characters' perspectives, or like, I guess Twilight didn't do that. It was all from Bella's, but anyway, I haven't read it. But like the telling of a story from different perspectives, um, it's something that is obviously very key in Singles Club. I think one of the things this gets at is the idea that the way you tell a story is oftentimes as important or more important than what the story you're telling is. Because like if you ripped Phonogram apart and you just you put the whole thing chronologically and told the story, it might still be interesting, but it wouldn't have those moments of realization
Mm-hmm.
that it has now. Because like imagine you're just reading it, and you're seeing Penny like ask Mark to dance, and we've seen the whole time that Mark is dealing with the ghost of his ex, and then she asks him and he says no, but we immediately understand that, oh, he's saying no not because he doesn't like her, but because of this. And that, I think, that takes so much away, and I think it removes our ability to feel for these characters so closely, because in writing a lot of novels, so most novels are written from a third person perspective.
Yeah.
First person novels are more common these days than they probably used to be, but most novels are written from a third person perspective. In the study of literature, people talk about whether a novel is written from third person limited perspective or third person omniscient. And
Oh, okay.
usually things are on like a spectrum here where it's like it's never completely one or the other. There's always a bit of a blend. And this is basically the idea of how closely does the camera follow the main character? To put it in film terms.
Mm-hmm.
In third person limited, the camera's close behind the main character, and we're only told about things that are roughly in their area. And we're not told about the internal thoughts of other characters because those are outside this character's experience.
Yeah.
In third person omniscient perspective, we see everything. We see the world, we see other characters' thoughts. And the truth is that few novels are all one or the other. They often move between the two, they jump to different characters, and we get glimpses into different people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the more you zoom out that camera, the harder it is to put yourself in the shoes of any one person in that scene. Because the more information you have, the harder it is to kind of hone in and parse out their limited perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, like
Because you already know.
yeah, like you were saying. So, like, if you had
Yeah.
that third person omniscient information, the ending of that first issue you described to us, where Penny goes to ask him, do you want to dance, and he shoots her down, and she's devastated, but she then has that realization that screw it, I'm going to go dance for me. If you have all of the information, her reasoning behind feeling that way gets diminished, and it takes away from her experience, I find.
Yeah. Right. Because like she's not like her choice isn't any less important, but we already see that like he wasn't being a jerk, he was
Mm-hmm.
just wrapped up in his own feelings, and you know we see it's like okay great, she kind of took the best lesson from it, but also her reaction that he was being a dick is not true, and so it things like that are yeah. I think in comic books especially, it's really cool to see experimental storytelling like this, where like you get issues like Kid with Knife and it's got no dialogue, or there's an issue in here that follows the DJs, and so every single panel is zoomed in on the DJs behind the booth as they talk
Oh,
to various people off screen and talk to each other.
well, that's pretty cool.
And so like yeah, because it follows Seth and Silent Girl, the DJs, and
Oh,
every
okay.
single panel, like the frame never moves. It is always right here on the DJ booth, and they talk to people who are off screen. They move. We see the lighting change as things happen inside the club. Um, but like it's great, and it's very. I mean, like it's very experimental in my mind, but it's cool. Like
Yeah.
it's cool to get such a different issue thrown in here in the middle of this.
Yeah, definitely. And given that that is literally their perspective, right? They're stuck in that booth doing their
Right.
job while they're doing what they
Yeah.
do. And I think too, like the lens with which to go to film that each character experiences also tremendously lends to our understanding of them and how they function within their world.
Yeah.
And like when you're mentioning about the study of comics being more like film, it's interesting that you bring that up. Just a few days ago, I watched a YouTube video by Francis Manapul, who's a comic book artist. He's worked for DC, he's worked for Marvel. Fantastic artist. And very deliberately, when he talks about how he makes comics, he talks in the terms of film. He's like, so in how he starts this video even is very cinegraph. He uses cinematography basically to show you all these
Yeah.
shots, and he talks about an establishing shot and how you can use these different perspectives to line up a world. So I agree. I think the study of comics itself
Yeah.
will become more like the study of film. Yeah.
I mean, hell, like when you're drafting a movie, I mean, people who are painstaking about the process, they storyboard their movies, and what are storyboards if not basically, rough comics
Yep.
to draw out the movie so that you have an idea what it's going to look like for that. Like The Matrix, which is one of those classic movies that really stands out and I think feels a lot like a comic book. Like The Matrix was obsessively storyboarded.
Ah,
I've
okay.
watched making of stuff where you see that like they like painstakingly drafted their storyboards and then copied those shots for the movie. like some of the most iconic shots, like over Trinity's shoulder as the officer comes up, like that's in the storyboard.
Wow.
The agent like pummeling somebody in the stomach, with these rapid fire fists. It's in the storyboard, even as it's shot from, I think
I think it's
underneath or
shot from
above.
above,
Like yeah,
right?
it's shot like right above, and he's like pummeling. Like these things are in the storyboards, because the shots that you take and use really matter. Uh, Especially for some of these stories. And I mean, some stories they don't, right? Like some stories you don't need super fancy or evocative shots for. But some stories like this, like your shots can really change the way the story is told.
Mm-hmm.
The issue about Seth and Silent Girl, the DJs, would be way less interesting if the camera was always moving around and we were seeing the club and stuff. But because we've got this consistent shot of them behind the booth, we focus in on these really minor details and changes, the way the lighting plays off of them, their movements and interactions with each other, the way Seth is talking to somebody off screen, as he like listens to their song requests and goes like, no, like we look at those things and like we really focus in on all those little details, where I think they would get lost if it was always jumping around and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Tyler, absolutely, I agree. I think the way that the comics are studied and the way that people should read comics is, like you said, a screenplay. And now I'm curious if we will ever see like the Matrix screenplay turned into a comic or something. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing about Phonogram and the complex story. I hope the people out there in YouTube land go and get it because it sounds really sick. I'm gonna make sure I pick up the three of them so I can get a hold of them and read them. But yeah, thank you so much for coming
yeah,
on.
thanks for having me again.
All right, I'll see you later.
All right.